Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. So glad to have you with us. Fun show coming up. Mitch Light, managing editor of Athlon Sports, going to be with us to give us some more insight into how the nation views Georgia this year. That's going to be interesting. Some really good stuff on James Coley off the top today, including what some of the Georgia players have said about him over the course of the last few weeks, and kind of how a lot of folks, important folks, anonymous coaches, kind of view Coley's role in determining if Georgia wins the national championship this season in his first year as offensive coordinator. We'll also hear Kirby Smart, who recently weighed in on Georgia quarterback Jake Braun. We're busy, summer Q&A as well. More details on DawgNation Days of Summer and a whole lot more as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm not going to lie to you. I had a lot of fun with the anonymous coach stuff yesterday on the program. I want to come back for another round from a different magazine. If you're watching on video, you can see I'm holding in my hands, and if you're listening on the radio or the podcast, you'll have to take my word for this. I'm holding in my hands the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. Now, later on, managing editor of Athlon Sports, Mitch Light, the guy responsible for putting all this together, he's going to be with us on the program. So we have a lot to talk about with him, but there is another section of anonymous coach stuff. And first of all, I read the stuff from the Lindy's magazine yesterday, and this is from the Athlon magazine today. It's really interesting, and I'm not going to do all of this because there is kind of a lot of information here, but it's amazing how not hater-sounding the Athlon coaches are compared to the Lindy's coach yesterday. I think there's a real stark difference in tone, and if you buy both these magazines at your newsstand, put them side by side, the anonymous coach from yesterday that was just going in on Georgia, and I'm not thick-skinned. I don't care what somebody says about that. I just think it's kind of interesting. But compare this to the very, very different tone when it comes to what the coaches are saying here about Georgia in this case. It's a lot more, I guess, complimentary or a lot more respectful maybe in the overall language that's used. But in particular, there's something that gets mentioned when the opposing coaches size up Georgia, which is what the Athlon magazine calls this, that I think leads us into a pretty interesting conversation. It's really amazing how much the new offensive coordinator, James Coley, factors into all this discussion. Now, for Georgia fans, they've had it out on this one way or another, how different Coley's going to be from Chaney, what they want to see from Coley. Well, Georgia fans have kind of had all of this at the moment that Coley was announced as the offensive coordinator. But for a lot of folks around the country, apparently opposing coaches in particular, they're kind of just now really paying close attention to this. And what they weigh in on Coley, I think, is pretty interesting. Now, based on the way this is written with a few like dots here and there, I'm going to assume this is a couple of different coaches who speak on this. We'll ask Mitch Light about that a little bit later on, but I'm assuming this is a couple different coaches, but a lot of them bring up James Coley. Now, I apologize for not having a fancy graphic for you on the screen, but I am going to read it nonetheless. One coach says, I think with Jake Fromm coming back and Jim Chaney leaving, they're going to throw the ball a little bit more, a coach says. I think they'll spread it out a little bit more in their base stuff. However, what I'm assuming is a different coach says the biggest question mark is James Coley as the first-time play caller in the SEC. Listen to this. That's going to be scary at first, and in that situation, the responsibility is solely on you if it goes bad because the talent is all over the field. And then another, what I'm assuming a different coach says, that the entire season for Georgia comes down to play calling and the SEC championship game, essentially getting over the hump against Alabama. So no surprise here that an offensive coordinator is right in the crosshairs of pretty intense conversation about preseason expectations. That's not unique to Georgia. That happens with virtually every team. But to hear these opposing coaches really put a lot of this on the feet of James Coley, assuming Georgia will throw it more, assuming that James Coley is going to respond well to the pressure of trying to get this Georgia offense where Jim Chaney came just short of going, which is to the promised land of a national championship. I find that to be kind of interesting. Now, when you look at what's been said about this going back to the winter and the spring, a lot of Georgia players have also kind of weighed in on what they expect from a new James Coley offense, how it would be different from what Jim Chaney was doing here over the last couple of years. One of those, in fact, was Jake Fromm. Here's what he said.
Is the playbook going to be different? No. It's just probably going to be more added on to it. So super excited, what we got going in. I can't wait to see, what happens during spring. And, really just kind of see, what's going to happen.
That's from WSB TV Channel 2's Bulldogs Game Day show. So he says, don't expect it to be too much different, but maybe some more things added in. Well, that's what a lot of Georgia fans are hoping for. I mean, let's face it. There were a lot of Georgia fans who did not like Jim Chaney. There were a lot of Georgia fans who didn't like the direction of the offense at times, thought it was too conservative. So when they hear Fromm back those months ago, right before the start of spring practice, saying, we're going to add some new things into the offense, listen, there are a lot of Georgia fans who got some suggestion. There are a lot of Georgia fans who would write down some things of, how about you add this in? How about you add that in? How about you do these things to maybe make some elements of the Georgia offense more exciting? And that sense from some Georgia fans who want more of that, that sense of anticipation was probably piqued a little bit more by something that UGA tight end Charlie Werner said during spring practice about what he expects from this new James Coley offense. Here's Werner.
I think his first instinct would be to throw. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I can definitely see us throwing a little bit more, which I think would help us in the run game as well. You know, opens up the run game because they're scared of the pass. So
I think if you polled, I'm talking about as scientific as you can make it, lots of responses from a lot of plugged-in Georgia fans. When Werner says, from his opinion, that he thinks that James Coley's first instinct would be to throw, if you polled Georgia fans on that, I think for the most part you'd get a favorable response to that. I don't think Georgia fans want to see Georgia become a Big 12 offense or really anything like that, but adding a little more offense into or I should say a little more of a passing offense into what's going on here, doing a little more things like that to complement the big offensive line in the running game, I think a lot of Georgia fans would like that. More than 51% would probably view that description of Charlie Werner about the James Coley offense. I think a good many people would probably view that favorably. And if they would feel that way about what Werner said, I think they would especially feel that way about something that Tyler Simmons also said before the start of spring practice. You'll really like this. Here's Simmons.
I feel like there will be a different feel, a little bit more energetic feel to the offense this year. Might have the ball in the air a little bit more, just a little bit more balanced offense, I feel like, this year. And Coley brings a lot of energy to the offense, so we're all really excited.
So listen, you got Tyler Simmons saying, hey, new wrinkles, more explosive offense. You've got Charlie Werner saying instinct might be to pass a little bit more, to open up things for the running game. Jake Fromm a little less committal on that, just simply says the playbook's just going to have more volume, more heft to it this year. Opposing coach in Athlon's Preview magazine says, I think that that they are going to throw the ball a little bit more with James Coley transitioning to Jim Chaney. There's only one problem with this, though. There's only one problem. I don't think Kirby Smart necessarily feels that way, because that's ultimately the guy that's going to decide all this. That's ultimately the guy that's going to determine just how different it is and how many new wrinkles there are and how much more explosive it is. And as much as I would like to see and hope to see a few more certainly deep passing plays added to the Georgia offense, and I get excited about hearing Tyler Simmons saying what he said and the other Georgia players saying what they said, I mean, Kirby Smart, when you heard him talk this spring, certainly he talked about the Georgia offense as a replication of what it has been the last couple of years. In fact, here's an example from Kirby during the spring.
Look, we've been really successful at running the ball. That's who we are at Georgia. So we're not going to go recreate the wheel and say, okay, well, now we're going to open up and be an empty spread team every down and go high tempo. You do what makes you successful. And he had a meeting with the offense yesterday, in which I sat in, and he talked about balance. What is balance? People think balance means 50-50. The balance is not 50-50. Balance is being able to run the ball when you have to run the ball and being able to throw the ball when you have to throw the ball. So can you do both? Yes, you can be successful at both. That might be 70-30 one game and then 30-70 the other way the next game. So I think we're going to be successful at that because I think that's going to be based on having good players. But I don't think that we're going to say, okay, we're throwing out everything we've done, we're starting over. We really had one coaching change on the offensive side of the ball, and every year when you go reinvent yourself, you say, okay, who are my best players? How are we going to get them the ball? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are the things we got to really work on? And we've done that for almost 2 months now because our signing class was pretty much done in January. We've been working on us and saying, okay, what can we do better? And I think James brings a lot of that to the table. They've gone and visited with a lot of people to get new ideas.
I mean, when I hear Kirby Smart say that, it almost makes it sound like that Coley was hired because of his ability to replicate what Georgia's been doing over the past couple of years. And from a statistical standpoint, that's a good decision to make. Georgia has been a dominant offense no matter what your eyes may have seen. The stats tell the story of Georgia being one of the three or four best offensive teams in the entire country from an efficiency standpoint and virtually every other metric as well. And yet, as a fan of this team, I still find myself saying, like a lot of these players just did a moment ago, but can you add the additional wrinkle that puts this team over the top? Can you be as explosive as Trevor Lawrence was, as Tua Tagovailoa was, along the way to matching them against each other in a national championship game? And as the anonymous coaches say, a lot of that pressure is going to be put on James Coley. And I'm like, a lot of these players, a lot of these coaches, a lot of these fans around the country, I'm really curious to see how it all works out with Coley myself. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, back on the radio today, too. Georgia baseball later on this evening. We'll talk some Diamond Dogs for a bit later on in the program, but looking forward to being back here today on the Classic City at noon every day on 960 The Ref, Athens Sports Radio there, and of course as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad that you found DawgNation Daily today, and we are really getting excited about our DawgNation Days of Summer. Coming up on Thursday, June 13th, it all kicks off and gets started at Callaway Resort and Gardens. And listen, one of the things we're going to start doing the days ahead is kind of setting up the itinerary for all that's going to be going on there and kind of when you should expect to do what and all the different amenities you have a chance to take advantage of, plus what our big event that night at 6 p.m. is going to be like, the special guests that are going to be with us, and kind of everything else. We got a lot of details to start unwrapping and unfolding for you on that. Of course, don't forget, when you go to DawgNation.com and get in there and get your room reserved, if you're one of the first 20 or so, we are going to make room for you as a part of our VIP reception that takes place before the big event goes down there at 6 p.m. that night. So it's all starting on Thursday, June 13th at Callaway Resort and Gardens. Got another big event coming up Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. DawgNation Days of Summer are going to be a ton of fun. We cannot wait for you to be a part of that. Let me also go around the Doghouse here right now, presented today by our friends at Online Trading Academy. And we just spent a couple of minutes talking about how the new James Coley offense might look with him in place of Jim Chaney as Georgia offensive coordinator, and the curiosity that's been piqued by that move with some of the anonymous coaches quoted in the Athlon Sports Preseason College Football Magazine. And as an additional kind of add-on to that conversation, when Kirby Smart was in Macon earlier this week, the subject of Jake Fromm came up. Now, I do think it's kind of interesting to see Georgia in a position it hasn't been in a while. I mean, think back the Kirby Smart era, the end of the Mark Richt era. We've had a lot of short-tenured starting quarterbacks at Georgia for various reasons. But now you've got Jake Fromm going into his third season, a junior, after having two very successful seasons as a starting quarterback. That experience ought to be a real weapon that Georgia can use this season. And I've been curious during the spring to kind of get a sense of how that experience is being used at Georgia, how Fromm is different as a player, kind of what's going on there in that regard. And when Smart spoke to reporters on Wednesday, he went into a little more details about exactly what will be different for Fromm this year. Here's what Kirby had to say about that then.
I think Jake's doing a great job. I think he's got kind of some more quarterback guys around him with Coley going in there working with him. He's excited about that. I think for him, it's been a transition through the coordinator position where he's kind of a sponge. He's got more of an opinion now. He understands what we're trying to do offensively. So I think anytime you've got a 3-year starter, he can give you input on the things he likes about the offense, the things he dislikes, the things he thinks can be successful, and that input's helpful. It's always helpful, but ultimately as coaches, we got to decide what we're going to do.
There's something that Smart doesn't say there that I feel like is implied by what he says. He says, hey, he can give us input. He can talk about the things that he does like. He can talk about the things that he doesn't like about the offense. He can kind of tell us what he sees from his perspective. Now, to be able to have that kind of ability to evaluate the offense, both in terms of what you're running and how it matches up against the defenses that you're seeing, I think there is a point to be made about how much the game must have slowed down for Fromm now that he's able to do that. I can only imagine what it must be like to step in as a quarterback at the SEC level the way that Fromm did in 2017 as a true freshman. I can only imagine how fast everything must have appeared to be moving to him there at that time. And my guess is when you watch the progression, the development from Fromm in year 2 in 2018 compared to that first year, my guess is it slowed down a good bit more from freshman to sophomore season. And now you're talking about a guy who's now seeing a lot of this now for the third time. All of a sudden, your seasoning, your experience, your time served, all of a sudden that gives you a chance to really see defenses moving in a way that you could not notice this when you first got started as the Georgia starting quarterback back in 2017. My guess is that is something that Jake Fromm's going to be able to really use to his advantage this season. And my guess is we do see a benefit from that. And something else that Kirby Smart also briefly alluded to there is that doesn't just stand to benefit Fromm and benefit the Georgia offense. It also stands to benefit the guys who are watching Fromm right now, guys like Stetson Bennett and Dwan Mathis, two guys who have kind of an interesting skill set and yet they maybe just need a little bit more time learning while watching from. Certainly gives them a chance to do that. It's Around the Doghouse. It's here today, presented by Online Trading Academy. And listen, everybody wants to make money in the markets. Everybody's thinking about retirement or thinking about just having more money to do the things that you want to do. And investing is obviously the way to go towards that. But one of the big questions is, well, what do you invest in? Well, I think there's a simple first step with all of that. It's the decision to invest in yourself. Educate yourself about the markets, and then you'll be in a position to make more money in the markets. That's what Online Trading Academy provides. A chance to learn about an entire variety of trading styles, all different kinds of asset classes, that kind of everything else. Also in the classroom and online. Online Trading Academy has a lot of ways to serve you, so please check them out at this website. It's tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's Trading Academy with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta, and you can be in position to make money in the markets. It's Online Trading Academy, bringing Around the Doghouse to us today here on DawgNation Daily. We've got a fun summer Q&A with you coming up a little bit later on. I'll also tell you more about that really cool autographed Nick Chubb piece of memorabilia that you can get a chance to get. We'll do all that kind of later on in the program. For now, though, as we promised, he is the managing editor of Athlon Sports. It's Mitch Light here on DawgNation Daily. And I'm a fan of the Athlon Preview magazine. In fact, for those of you watching on video, you can see I'm holding it in my hand right now. Always fun to catch up this time of year with Mitch Light, the managing editor of Athlon Sports, one of the guys responsible for putting this magazine together, and a lot of great preseason content. Great college football fan, guy that's been following the sport for a long time. Mitch, welcome back to DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me on, Brandon. Always enjoy our chats.
So before we get into the football stuff, I believe you said you're at the SEC baseball tournament. Kind of a wild day at the tournament yesterday, was it not?
It was. I just went down for the Vanderbilt-Auburn game, so my son and I, we drove down. It's about left here in Nashville about 12:30, watched that game, and left, and I listened to the LSU-Mississippi State game on the radio, got home, and it was in the 7th inning, watched a few innings, went to bed, then woke up and found out that they were still playing until about 3 a.m. So there's always something crazy going on at the SEC tournament. Usually weather-related, but that game was wild.
Yeah, it's certainly an amazing thing to see. It's a really fun sporting event, and it's kind of cool to see that cranked up again here. All right, a lot I want to talk to you about Georgia and the magazine, which is on newsstands now. I have purchased my copy. Let me start with this because I know that, when it comes to the anonymity of the coaches that you speak to, you got to protect that. I totally get that. And yet, hearing from my audience, there's a little bit of a fascination with how the anonymous coach interviews come together and the guys that kind of share off the record their feelings about various teams. Is there anything you can tell us about the process about how something like that comes to be?
Yes. I mean, we speak to multiple coaches. Couple reasons, because we want different perspectives, and we also don't want, let's say we talk to an assistant coach who, didn't get hired by Kirby Smart 5 years ago as a TV coach. I'm just making this up, and it's kind of extra grind. If we do pull some stuff out that I think is kind of inappropriate, we want some spicy stuff, and there's some interesting stuff, but, there's a line between, good content and something that, someone's just spiteful or something like that. So, I do some of it myself. I farm it out to some guys who, you recognize the names, who are more national writers, who have more contacts out there in different parts of the country. So the key is just to try and get as many coaches as possible to weigh in against or get different perspectives, and we don't get someone, someone with an extra grind. For example, like we just heard from, and I'd have to go back and read it, we just heard from the North Carolina Media Relations Office. They weren't thrilled with the stuff in there about North Carolina. I think it was coaches talking about how, Mac Brown, more of a CEO type, isn't going to get his hands dirty and all that stuff. So we do hear from schools every once in a while who aren't thrilled with the stuff we have in there.
That's really interesting, and I'm sure that you're like me. There's something really fascinating that happens when you will grant the cloak of anonymity, when you'll give a little bit of privacy. All of a sudden, you do get some more candid comments because, as you know, Mitch, you interview coaches on the record all the time. They don't really have a tendency to say very much, very interesting very often. So when you can say, hey, we won't use your name here, tell us what you really think, a lot of times the level of interesting statements goes up, does it not?
Oh, totally. Coaches, they're like high school girls. They like to talk. They like to gossip. And what things I'll do? I'll also, sometimes I don't want them to get in trouble with what they say. Like they might say, when we played and it was raining and we couldn't stop it, well, I'm not going to put that in there because someone could figure it out. But you're right. I mean, coaches, that's all this in this business. We find out what we need to know. So coaches, they kind of trust you and stuff. Like, I think, as you know, I moonlight as a sideline reporter for Vanderbilt Radio, and I interview I interview the coordinators every Thursday for an on-the-record interview, and then I turn off the recorder, and I'll be like, okay, what's the deal here? And they'll be like, this guy can't play, or this guy good. That's how you get the information. It's from coaches who trust you to use it the right way. It's the same thing here.
So one of the things that is similar in your predictions to what a lot of the other national predictions are right now is Georgia's kind of parked right below Alabama and Clemson. As you might imagine on our show, Mitch, we talk about this all the time. What's it going to take to kind of break through that ceiling? And really, this is one of those things where most of the magazines, most of the online content, they're all going to be pretty much the same. So as someone who's kind of not inside the bubble of DawgNation here, kind of more from the national perspective, what is it going to take? I mean, when you look at Georgia and the gap that exists in your mind between them and the two teams that played for the national championship last year and the team that beat Georgia twice in the calendar year of 2018, what is the difference? What is the short thumbnail that you would provide of what it's going to take to get Georgia into that most exclusive of clubs?
This is the easy answer. Make one more play. I don't tell Georgia fans how close they were to beating Alabama the last few years. Don't miss a field goal. Don't take a punt. Make one more tackle. I mean, they're so close to being there. They've played for the majority of 2 games against Alabama. That being said, on paper heading into this year, Alabama and Clemson to us were in a tier by themselves. I'm not going to say in a class by themselves, but that's not accurate. In a tier by themselves. There are really rational arguments for Clemson won, and there are rational arguments for Alabama won. We had Alabama. And I think there's another tier, and that's Georgia on its own. Clearly, Georgia was, some people might have them higher. I don't see how you have Georgia lower than third, because I think there's a little line there before you get into the Ohio State, Michigan, and Oklahoma, that crew. So, Georgia, from a talent standpoint, doesn't have the overall depth of talent as Alabama and Clemson, because some of their elite recruiting classes are only 2-3 years into the program, where those schools have kind of a head start. They have some issues, obviously, this year. I think a wide receiver, a lot of new guys on defense. But from a talent and coaching standpoint, Georgia's right there. And if they make one more play in either or both of those games, we're probably talking about Georgia in an even better light than we are now.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting statement to make. And then the same topic on the 2 quarterbacks for both those teams, Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence. And, Jake Fromm kind of also in most of these, your magazine included, kind of tucked kind of just below them in terms of the overall national perception as well. Now, the one thing that I think is different about Fromm compared to the other two is, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree, is there seems to be a pretty strong sense of uniformity about, what Lawrence is. Almost everybody thinks he's probably the best quarterback in the country, and, a pretty solid sense of agreement on what Tua Tagovailoa might be. You do see a little more range of opinion when it comes to Fromm. For instance, there's some people who think that Fromm still has something to prove. There's at least 1 or 2 folks who think he may be the number 1 overall draft pick come April in the NFL draft. It seems like when it comes to evaluations of Fromm, there's a little wider range of where people currently think he is and what his possible outcome is by the end of the year. How do you compare Fromm to guys like Lawrence and Tua? And I guess to a certain extent you're going to include Jalen Hurts and Oklahoma in there as well. What are your thoughts on Fromm right now?
Yeah, it's sort of like the teams. Alabama and Clemson are on paper the 2 best teams. Their quarterbacks are the 2 best quarterbacks on paper, and then there's a little bit of a gap there. Fromm's interesting. Tua is. Their offensive stats were unbelievable last year. He's flashy. He runs a little bit more. Lawrence is, as a true freshman, made all the throws, was so impressive. And Fromm is just sort of like, I don't know, it's like not boring. That's not the right word. And I don't mean that as an insult. He's just a really, really good quarterback who can do everything you want at that position. I think maybe he doesn't get as much credit as the other guys because has not made as many wow plays. The Georgia offense has been good. It hasn't been as good as the other two. And, this isn't – when a team loses, its quarterback usually doesn't play well. But, you look at the LSU game, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this there, the stats in wins versus losses, and they didn't lose much. It was pretty wide last year. So I think he needs to avoid that type of performance this year if he wants to, I doubt he'll be back as a senior. But if next year we're talking about first-team All-Americans, I think my only thing would be Fromm needs to be more consistently good against the really, really good teams on their schedule.
I want to finish up with kind of a national perspective here in a moment, but let me ask you one more specific thing about Georgia, and it's specific from your magazine. One of the things that I noticed that makes the Athlon preview a little bit different than some of the ones that I've kind of seen is, and there's not a great deal of difference here, but you guys did have Deandre Swift ranked a little lower on the Heisman pecking order than some of the places that I've seen. You had a couple running backs ranked ahead of him, most prominently Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. How do you think Swift compares to those elite backs right now? Obviously, Etienne from Clemson is going to come up in that. I mentioned Taylor from Wisconsin. What do you think the evaluation of Swift stands right now?
Great player. I wouldn't. The Heisman thing is we don't have to much more. Dick Fromm's going to still out of the spotlight. Jake Fromm's not there. Swift's higher on our list. You know how that works. Alabama running backs other than Mark Ingram. It's hard to pick them for the Heisman because they always have so many running backs. Swift, he's a great player. I mean, I think Taylor and Travis Etienne, I believe, are first-team All-Americans. I don't have it right in front of me. I guess I should know off the top of my head. We probably have Swift third or fourth-team All-American, but clearly an explosive back. I knew he was good as a freshman, and I watched him a bunch. But in that championship game against Auburn, you really saw how good he was. And if he gets most of the carries this year, there's no doubt he can run his way into the Heisman race. But it just seems like with a really good quarterback and some depth at running back, it's hard to kind of evaluate him as a true Heisman guy.
I'm curious as a guy, and we'll finish with this, that gives opinions for a living. You do podcasts, you write stuff, and you're like me. You just like kind of giving your thoughts on college football. Is it kind of boring now? I mean, I hate to even say it that way, but I mean, everyone's going to pick Georgia to win the East. Everyone's going to pick Alabama to win the West. Everyone's going to pick Clemson to win the ACC. I imagine most people are going to pick Oklahoma to win the Big 12, although I guess Texas will get some love there. I mean, it seems like there's never been more consistency with opinions right now. I love the idea of there being a surprise team, although I don't want anyone to surprise Georgia, but I love the idea, generally speaking, of there being surprise teams and things that we didn't expect happening. But, boy, it seems like there's not a lot of room for surprises in college football right now. As a guy who makes preseason predictions essentially for a living, is it less interesting knowing that the winners are now fairly easy to predict?
Yes, 100%. I don't like it. Doing our magazines, I like when we go into our prediction meeting and debate things and really have, stuff to talk about and maybe pick a surprise number one, not because we were just trying to be cute, because there's no favorite. I remember one year we picked Florida, the year they won in 2008, whatever. Kind of went on a limb there, and we got that right. We got plenty of stuff wrong. But this year, when you're making predictions, if you don't have Alabama and Clemson in your top two, in my opinion, you're trying to be cute. You're trying to be different. Now, I get the Georgia argument. You can say they're going to win the East, so they just need to beat Alabama. But when you're doing these top fives, these top tens, there's certain teams you just have to have in there because they're going to be there. And I'm with you, Brandon. It'd be more fun if it was a more wide open race. Who's to say Michigan or someone else doesn't come up and win the whole thing this year? But to talk about it in the off season, I wish there was a little bit more parity.
So for people who want to find the Athlon Preseason Magazine or more of the content you guys do in there at the website, how can people get in touch with you and get in touch with the things happening at Athlon?
Well, our magazine should be on newsstands almost anywhere. And our national preview, Jake Fromm will be on the SEC preview. And actually, he's on the national preview on sale in Atlanta and Georgia. But we bumped up our national magazine by 40 pages this year. It's over 300 pages. The first Athlon sports magazine ever over 300 pages. We have 2 pages on every Power 5 team. I think it's a really good product this year. So you can buy a newsstand or on our website at athlonsports.com/store. And if you're listening to this and you do not live in Atlanta and you want that Jake Braun cover, you can buy it on our website.
All right, great to hear, Mitch. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily. Always fun to catch up with you, and hope we get a chance to speak to you soon.
No problem. Anytime, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Mitch Light, Athlon Sports. I know it wasn't a great cell phone, and I do apologize for that. I do like having Mitch on the show, though. I think he has really good insight in college football. And I guess in listening to Mitch there's one big thing that kind of comes to mind for me because it ties into what Bill Bender from the Sporting News said yesterday and really essentially what a lot of people nationally have said about Georgia. And this may be an example of something is true and I just don't want to consider. And maybe we should add this to our summer Q&A a little bit later on. I kind of called it an audible the other day, added a question to this. As painful as this is to talk about, maybe we should add this in there as well. I mean, it certainly seems like when you listen to these national guys talk about the comparison between Georgia and Alabama, What they're essentially saying without saying it is that Georgia choked. Georgia choked at the end of the 2017 season. Georgia choked in the SEC championship last year. They got outscored, 30-something to 3 in fourth quarter and overtimes combined of these last couple of years. It seems like the national people want to say that this was a choke job by Georgia, that Georgia had the win in its hand and it let it slip away. And if you've listened to me on the show, I've kind of talked about it in different terms than that. I've kind of talked about it from the standpoint of, hey, it's hard to beat Alabama for 4 quarters. It's hard it's hard to hold a team like that down all game long, and it's not like Georgia was up by 28 points. They were up a couple of touchdowns, and teams come back from a couple touchdown leads all the time. And this wasn't necessarily a choke job. It was an incredibly disappointing loss, and it's the kind of loss that's really hard for fans to get over, but it's not a choke job. That's not what the national people seem to think. And maybe this is an example of something being true that's easier to see from 10,000 feet than it is when it's right in front of your nose. And so I'd be curious to hear what Georgia fans think about that when they look back on how close Georgia has been to getting over the hump with Alabama the last couple of years. Maybe they don't take quite as optimistic of an appraisal of it as I do, because what I have told people, and you've heard me say this on the show, the way in which Georgia has played Alabama the last couple of years is not an argument against Georgia. They can't get over the hump, in other words. It's an argument in favor of Georgia. Look how good Georgia can be against the best teams in the country, which is not the same thing as saying it's a moral victory to play Alabama close. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you've seen Georgia on this field, you're seeing a team that proves it belongs among the national elite. I am personally of the belief that this whole idea of clutch performance or choke jobs and things like that, for the most part, that's myth making. For the most part, that's superstition. And I don't really buy into the idea too much, even though Georgia let a lead slip away, and even though it was very painful how it went down. I kind of don't buy into the idea that it was a choke job for Georgia in either of these last 2 Alabama games. I would define it somewhat differently, although there's a chance when you keep hearing the national guys describe something that sounds very much like a choke, maybe there's a chance I'm wrong about this, and maybe there's a chance that Georgia fans agree with the national guys on this more than they do with me. We'll give you a chance to weigh in on that on today's show.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really fun stuff with Mitch Light there. And as I said, I know that wasn't a great cell phone. I do apologize for that, but I thought that Mitch had some really good things to say, so I was glad we were able to have him on the program here today. Before we get to our SEC Through, let me remind you of something I talked about yesterday. I think this is a really exciting opportunity. I'm one of these guys now. If you were in here in our DawgNation World Headquarters studios, on this side of the room you see kind of like our traditional DawgNation Daily studio, the wall back here that somebody's described as a garage door in the past. It's not a garage door, but that's what somebody said it kind of looks like. But this is the kind of the side we do the room on every single day for this show. But on the other side of the room, we kind of have a little bit more of a I don't know. It's almost like a basement type setup. A lot of my personal memorabilia is on the shelves behind us. I'm one of these guys that I like to collect everything that really is created. It's kind of Georgia memorabilia, and the more unique it is, the more rare it is, the more I'm going to like it. Well, here's a unique, rare thing. If you're a Georgia collector, if you like stuff officially licensed, really cool collectibles, you're going to love this, because how about an officially licensed, and I get this now, personalized, autographed UGA cornhole board, easy for me to say, cornhole board by Nick Chubb. This is really amazing. There are only 100 of these available, and we're going to tell you about it on DawgNation Daily before you get a chance to hear about this anywhere else. Nick's going to be personalizing one board for each set. What personalized means is when you order yours, you tell him what your name is, and he basically writes a message to you as he autographs this. It's incredible. He's going to do that on one of the boards for each of these sets. These are obviously going to go really fast. That's one of the reasons why, as the host of DawgNation Daily, I said, can we give the DawgNation Daily folks a heads up on this before the rest of the world finds out about it? Because I'd love for my audience to be able to get this before anybody else does. The answer was yes. So here's the website you need to go to get your order in before Nick personalizes these, and then they're just gone in like 2 seconds. It's westgeorgiacornhole.com/Nick Chubb. Once again, the website, westgeorgiacornhole.com/Nick Chubb. You can order yours today. Nick's going to be personalizing, autographing one of the boards from each of these sets. There are 100 of these available. You want to act before they are gone. So, by the way, I mentioned this to Mitch Light briefly. How about the excitement in the SEC baseball tournament yesterday? You had, was it LSU at Mississippi State? They were playing like the crack of dawn this morning. Georgia's walk-off Cam Shepherd against Texas A&M. It's a pretty fun tournament right now, and I sound like a total hypocrite because I'm the guy earlier in the week that said the tournament didn't matter for Georgia one way or another. But once you get in here, they had a pretty good crowd for the game last night. I'm talking about for the LSU-Mississippi State game. Those are two big baseball fan bases. And once you see the walk-offs and the excitement, all of a sudden I want to see Georgia win this thing now. Like 2 days ago, I was just fast-forwarding to the regional, and now I want to see Georgia win the SEC tournament, hopefully without taxing its pitching staff too much on that. I think it's Cole Wilcox, the freshman, I believe, going today for the Diamond Dogs against a very good Arkansas team. That's like, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time today. So that'll be a lot of fun. We'll talk probably some Diamond Dogs tomorrow. This SEC tournament has once again turned out to be a pretty fun deal. All right, I mentioned yesterday that in addition to the anonymous coach stuff that's been out there about Georgia, obviously all these magazines also have things about the other programs as well. And one of the things I talked about yesterday was how one of the anonymous coaches quoted in the Lindy's magazine, and boy, I tell you, Lindy's found all the hating coaches. It sounds like Athlon found all the coaches that didn't have a ton of axes to grind. Lindy's, they found a lot of coaches who do a lot of hating. And one of the coaches on the subject of Tua Tagovailoa, this is from the Lindy's magazine. Maybe this is Davin Bellamy himself here, because he says, I think Tua needs to humble himself. I think he did some bad things in the bowl game that cost the team. He put himself ahead of the team. So I think that's kind of interesting. That's from the Lindy's preseason magazine. Well, Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn coach, goes on sports radio station in Mobile, Alabama. AL.com quotes him as defending Tua a little bit. So the former Auburn guy defending the Alabama QB right now, saying he puts the ball on the money. He throws in and out of the pocket. He takes a licking and keeps on ticking. He's kind of like the Energizer Bunny. I like him. I like the way he runs the team. In that game, right or wrong, he looked like he was taking it all on his shoulders. Now, the one thing that many of you are aware of that needs to be added as context here, Tommy Tuberville is running for Senate in Alabama. So Tommy Tuberville is apparently trying to win that Crimson Tide vote. I don't know if anybody's going to plan on voting for Tuberville, but I especially don't know if Alabama fans are going to be willing to vote for Tommy Tuberville. But I guess Tuberville's going to do his part to change that by going to this Alabama radio station and defending Tua Tagovailoa. I find all of this to be fascinating. The fact that, as I said, we're starting to see a little bit of a crack in the facade when it comes to Tua Tagovailoa, a guy that was universally praised a year ago. All of a sudden now, this year before, he becomes what could be a very high NFL draft pick. There's a lot more skepticism out there about him. I'm kind of curious to see where all of that goes and see how Tua responds to that on the field this season. And then the goofball Tommy Tuberville trying to curry favor and win some votes. I find that to be pretty interesting, too. Two other quick stories to get to. A Florida linebacker, Rashad Jackson, another former four-star, has reportedly entered the transfer portal. And the only thing I'm going to say about this is I'm of two minds on this. Obviously, as kind of the chief Gator hater, which I've kind of self-proclaimed myself to be, I always like bad news for Florida. And yet I start to feel like that my corner of kind of Gator hating and mocking Florida, I feel like that corner is starting to get pretty crowded. I'm actually a little nervous about how, after being overhyped a lot during the winter, I feel like there's almost been so much bad news for Florida this spring that's almost going too far for me in the other direction. I'm a little skeptical, a little nervous about that right now. But at the same time, I do get a kick out of watching Florida guys go in the transfer portal. I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't want to play there either. So I guess these guys maybe have a little bit better taste than I initially thought they did if they're looking to get out of Gainesville. And then finally, there are also some reports out there that Mike Elko, the Texas A&M defensive coordinator, who had his chances to get some head coaching jobs this offseason, will be mentioned in those discussions in the future. He may have just gotten a contract extension that's going to pay him now more than $2 million a year, joining guys like Dave Aranda in this league who already have that. My only point to make on this is, and y'all have heard me say before, and I know this kind of sounds weird when I say it, I'm not as big into facilities as everybody else is. This notion that Georgia's going to build fancier offices and somehow that's going to create national championships. I'm just not really quite sure how you buy national championships by building nicer commercial real estate. That's never made a lot of sense to me. I get indoor practice facilities. I get weight rooms. The whole idea of you need a football facility, I'll never quite understand why that's as important as apparently it is. However, one of the places that I do want to see a program like Georgia spend its money is when it comes to retaining assistants. Now, as it stands right now, Coley's new in his job as offensive coordinator. Dan Lanning's new in his job as defensive coordinator. The guys below them, the Glenn Schumans, the people like that, they're also relatively new in their job. But the way that Georgia has recently broken off Sam Pittman, recently given big money to Dell McGee, at a certain point in time, Georgia may need to also do that with its coordinators. When it comes time to spend that kind of money, join that $2 million club when it becomes something that you got to do to keep the guy that you got. That's the place that I think elite programs use their financial advantages to their benefit. Holding on to coaches as assistants as long as you can, keeping them from taking some low-level head coaching job because it's going to pay them more, that's how you produce a winner. And when Georgia gets there, my guess is that Kirby Smart's going to make sure that money gets spent. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on the program, I apologize for not previewing this a little earlier, but I want to dive into the summer Q&A right now. We'll take some of your comments as a part of our radio and podcast, and then on video, we'll take a few more of those. At a certain point in time, I think we're going to think about trying to figure out a way to add a comments-only section to our podcast. There's some logistical stuff we have to figure out for that, but we're going to make it podcast only. So for those of you that listen to the podcast, you're going to get something that no one else gets. And I think that'll be kind of a fun way to pay you guys back for being so loyal and faithful as podcast listeners. We'll tell you more about that as the summer goes on. For now, though, let me preview the questions, and we'll get a few comments before we roll on here. So there's a reason for question number one, and it's probably not worded the best, but here's how I said it. Which UGA unit or player could be considered the nation's best? The reason why I write this question is because, and you can see our production staff editorializing a little bit by showing some video of Rodrigo Blankenship, which I find to be kind of funny for those of you watching on video. But the official Georgia Twitter account yesterday tweeted out a brag tweet about 24/7 Sports ranking the Georgia offensive line as the best unit in the country in its preseason rankings. I thought that was kind of interesting to see Georgia kind of getting involved in list season. Around here on DawgNation Daily, we obviously pay close attention to preseason lists. That was kind of funny to see Georgia also apparently paying attention to some of these preseason lists from its official Twitter account. So is it Rodrigo Blankenship as the nation's best kicker? Is it the offensive line as the nation's best offensive line? Is Deandre Swift the nation's best running back? We talked about that with Mitch Light a little earlier. Weigh in on that as a part of our summer Q&A. Give me a position group, give me an individual player on the Georgia roster right now that you can say with confidence is the nation's best. I'd love to hear from you on that. A couple more questions to get to here for you as well. We, off the top of the program, addressed a lot about how the new James Coley offense might look for Georgia. I'm a little skeptical that it's going to be as many new passing wrinkles as some of the Georgia players apparently thought during the spring and some of the anonymous coaches quoted by Athlon Sports thing, although I'd certainly welcome a couple of more big passing attempts per game to that Georgia offense. You can weigh in on us with us and let us know that. And then finally, the final question as a part of our summer Q&A, what does Georgia need most to overtake Alabama and Clemson? And is it as simple as what Mitch Light kind of alluded to without saying earlier? I don't want to put words in his mouth, but when you hear a lot of these national guys talk, they seem to think that Georgia let that one slip away. A less generous way of describing that is maybe Georgia choked. You get a chance to kind of weigh in on that. And if you're listening to us radio podcast, you can obviously submit your answers by reaching out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. So on video, we'll take more of those comments coming up. Let me also wrap up here in style. As I said before, this turnstile of guys in the transfer portal for Florida, I can't enjoy that enough. But all of a sudden now it's sort of like when your favorite band goes from being the cool band playing in like the underground club to now all of a sudden they're on FM radio all over the place. All of a sudden it's not quite as hip as it once was. I feel like that's the way that Gator hating's become this summer, mocking Florida. I feel like it's become way too mainstream, which makes me a little bit nervous. One thing I don't want to give Florida is some sort of bone of saying nobody believes in us, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I want to do here. But I have to admit, I do like seeing all these Gators going to the transfer portal, getting out of town, recruits decommitting. It's been kind of fun to see. Something else that's fun to see, 936. That's the number for our Gator Hater Updater. That's how long it's been since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We're back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to seeing you then. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We'll take all your questions and comments, our summer Q&A, everything else included. And as we're doing so, I'll remind you that my friends Dari and the whole gang there at R.S. Andrews, they're good at delivering smiles. And if you've got an issue with your air, your heat, probably not the heat so much right now, although maybe you're cold-natured, plumbing, electrical, those things are 12-month-a-year issues. If you've got some sort of issue with that, you want to smile again, and R.S. Andrews is going to give you a chance to do so. So please check them out online at rsandrews.com. Can I also see the summer Q&A questions one more time for our video audience, just to kind of get everybody up to speed on what we're doing here? Once again, give me a player or a position group unit from Georgia that should be considered the nation's best. Not among the best, but your confidence level is this is the best in the country at either this individual position or a group of guys from a position group. I'd love to hear that. James Coley, his impact on the offense, how do things change? And, is it just as simple as Georgia's got to finish games? Is that the only thing that's missing from the Georgia, Alabama, Clemson comparison conversation about how Georgia overtakes them? I am personally of the belief the conversation is a little more complicated than that. And I'm not quite so sure that a lot of folks around the country necessarily feel that way. I'll give you a chance to weigh in on that today as well as part of our summer Q&A. Also, a quick programming note. We got a show tomorrow like always. Monday's Memorial Day, and in observance of the Memorial Day holiday, we'll be off, and hope you're enjoying some time with family and friends that day as well. But we're back again on Tuesday, and we're going to be pretty well regular schedule through the week of the 4th of July. At that point in time, things are going to get a little nutty around here, but basically the entire month of June, we're going to be regular shows. Randy Hall says, Andrew Thomas, best offensive tackle in the nation. Randy, I think that's as good an argument as you can make for anybody at any position for Georgia. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be able to tell you all the different players, for every team in the country. Walker Little, is he still at Stanford? He's going to be in that discussion probably. But I got a lot of confidence in saying that if you want to make a case for a Georgia player being the best at his position, Andrew Thomas is a pretty good place to start. Derek Tillman says, BA, if the Dogs win a national title, how about sporting a mohawk? Listen, Derek, there are a lot of things that I would do for Georgia if it won a national championship. I'm a little nervous about my hair, though, because I don't have a ton left. I feel like I've got just enough as it is. I'm a little bit afraid if I shaved it off, it's not going to grow back. I don't know, that may not be based on any kind of science whatsoever. But I'm a little bit afraid if I shaved it, it's not going to grow back. Because y'all remember a few years ago, and this seems, I guess, particularly poignant now, but do you remember when Donald Trump and Vince McMahon had their feud at WrestleMania? And Vince's wrestler lost, and Vince, who even as an older guy had pretty good head of hair, he shaved it all. I feel like it took a long time to grow back, I'd be a little nervous about that for myself. Matt Talley says he's comfortable in saying that he thinks Georgia has the best offensive line overall, and once again I think there's a pretty good case to be made for that too. I do. Micah Boyd says, when it comes to getting over the hump against Alabama, it's simple. On the day of the game, plan for playing the backup quarterback. Yeah, I know a lot of the Georgia players have talked about the challenge of when you get a different quarterback than you expected, especially when it's style of play so different. I mean, maybe it just kind of comes out of that. Maybe it just kind of comes out, come down to, how you finish that game there. Adam Hart Palmer says the hair not growing back is a legitimate concern. Well, I'm glad to know that somebody will say that. Although Jimmy Hoskins says your hair will grow back. Yeah, you got to understand something that, like, when I sit like this, kind of tall, it looks like I got a lot of hair. But every now and then on one of these shows, I'll turn around and point to something behind me. It's always a mistake. I've got to start remembering not to do that because I'm kind of like the house that's got, like, the really nice brick in the front, but it's got, like, vinyl siding in the back. I've kind of got I have kind of a nice facade here up front with hair. It's not quite as much going on in the back as you might think. Chad Thomas Black says, why is Justin Fields in Heisman consideration? What has he done? Chad, for me, this comes down to the starting quarterback at Ohio State is going to be a Heisman contender. Now, I think there's a difference between contender and candidate. I think you become a candidate over the course of the season. I think contenders are the guys that you mentioned at the start of the year. And virtually any Ohio State, if it was Tate Martell in that position, he'd be a Heisman contender. Fields may go on to live up to that. He may go on to not. But the Ohio State starting quarterback is going to get mentioned in preseason magazines. They're just going to, or the online stuff. Mike Little says, how's the backup quarterback looking? Speaking of that topic for Georgia, let me finish. He says, hate to think something may happen to Braun, but we need to be ready in case. Yeah, Mike, I think that Georgia is in a pretty similar situation to virtually any other team in the country right now. There aren't that many teams who probably feel like they have a backup they could step in and play and have that guy do as well as the current starting quarterback. Maybe Georgia had that last year with Fromm and Fields. They don't have that luxury this year. Could a Dwan Mathis or a Stetson Bennett come in and spell Georgia for a brief period? To me, that's about as much as you can hope for right now. I even feel that way about Alabama, even though Mac Jones was a former, fairly highly rated recruit, was committed to a different SEC school. even if Tua were to get hurt and they were to go to Mac Jones, I would even feel that way about Alabama's situation with Jones. I guess about the only school right now that feels like it's got pretty good depth of the major national contenders. The fact that Oklahoma right now has a 5-star kid, Spencer Rattler, backing up Jalen Hurts. They may feel like they have as much quarterback depth as anybody does right now. There's not a ton of teams, though, that say we could lose our starter and be just fine. The way at one point in time it seemed like Georgia was stockpiling quarterbacks, because let's not forget, when Justin Fields committed to Georgia, it appeared on paper that Georgia had Eason, Fromm, and Fields, that Georgia's just going to stockpile quarterback talent the way that it is talent at every other position. As it stands now, that's probably not the case for anybody anymore. No, but I think it's a really good question. Let me go to YouTube for a moment. Give these a chance to load up and get ready to go here. Over on YouTube, folks checking in to say, GB2 says Fromm has outplayed both Bama quarterbacks, never had to put a backup in to win the game. Yeah, I mean, I think the way that Fromm has played for the most part against Alabama is a real feather in his cap. Now, I know the way that he finished the game in 2017, I guess, raises some eyebrows, but the overall performance there against a defense as good as Alabama's, I think is an argument in favor of Fromm. Groon D says that Pickens and Blaylock are going to have to grow up right away. As I've said before, and I believe I've said this during our R.S. Andrews cooldown, I'm expecting something big from one of the two. I would say that the more likely to provide that right now is Blaylock, just based on the fact that Kirby's talked about him as much as he has. And while it seems, I guess, it's been, I don't want to say confirmed, but I'm not quite sure how I want to say this. It certainly seems we're moving in the direction of removing doubt that George Pickens is going to be eligible, but I guess it still remains to be seen when he's going to get here, I guess. Assuming that's not June, which I don't know that you should assume that, but if it's not June, then maybe that makes it a little harder to get on the same page as Fromm early on. Even if Pickens is here by the time practice begins, if he were to be somehow delayed in getting here for whatever reason, in terms of having those off-season voluntary workouts they can do with Fromm, the other quarterbacks, things like that, that might delay him just a bit. But just the fact that Kirby talked about Blaylock as much as he did would maybe make you favor Blaylock over Pickens, at least for right now. And I say that as someone who has very high expectations for George Pickens. Eric Anderson has a good idea. He says, let's get a Gator Hater updater board tweeted out or posted so I can share it. At one point in time, I have shared it a little bit. Maybe we should start doing that more frequently, or maybe doing it every day, Eric. I think it's a really good idea. Dapper Dan says, BA, feel free to go back to Facebook. This is the Tua board over here. Grace, you're always getting people started up over here. It's amazing to me. This is a good one. Alex Howard, going back to one of the other summer Q&A questions, says, I know you asked the other day, BA, but I truly believe that Tyler Clark is the most underrated player on the team. Now, Alex, what I'll say that's interesting about that is that when Kirby this spring was asked about who his difference-making defensive linemen are, he did mention Tyler Clark. Now, the problem, obviously, from the perspective of many fans is you go back and look at the true difference-making moment for him in the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma, where Oklahoma writers were talking about Tyler Clark and Roquan Smith in the same sentence in terms of talking about, guys that had wreaked havoc against Oklahoma that day. They were mentioning Clark and Roquan interchangeably. We probably didn't see that from him in 2018. So if he's become underrated, it's because of those less than Rose Bowl-like moments for Clark in the aftermath of that. But Kirby Smart still believes that's the kind of player that Tyler Clark can be. So from that standpoint, underrated may be a good way to say that, for sure. Light Dog 1968 says, serious question, are there any Bama shows like this? For the most part, and this is going to sound immodest, and I don't mean for it to, for the most part, there aren't any shows like this really for anybody. What we do around here is just a little bit different, and I take, real pride in that, because one of the things that, when we first started DawgNation as a website, and the website existed for a few weeks before I came to work here, but when we first got started and they brought me in, one of the things that I really pushed for was doing a show like this every single day. I believed that Georgia fans would accept that content. And listen, I've been wrong about plenty of my life, but this is one of the things that I was one billion% right on, that there's always an appetite for Georgia football. Y'all, it is the Thursday before Memorial Day. And, we've got no shortage of people ready to talk about, how the offensive line compares to whatever and how Georgia gets over the hump against Alabama. I mean, for the average Joe, this couldn't be less college football season. I mean, it just could not be less college football season. We are 2 days away from a 3-day holiday weekend. People are, in the minds of a lot of people, they're thinking about, hamburgers on the grill and sunscreen at the pool more so than they're thinking about, 3-4 defenses and things like that. But I was really of the belief that, to borrow the line from Field of Dreams, that if you built it, people would come. And here we are, going into a Memorial Day weekend, just chatting about Georgia football like we do every single day, because I knew that y'all would be here for it. Not because I'm some great thing or anything like that, just because the topic's fun to talk about. It's just a fun topic. And I am eternally grateful for the ways in which those of you who've chosen to support this show show up and do that every single day. I hear Connor Riley's microphone coming on.
Stole the overrated Kevin Costner baseball line movie right out of my mouth.
Don't do that, please. Don't start this.
I've actually never seen Field of Dreams.
Have you really not?
Haven't seen Field of Dreams or Bull Durham.
So I'll say this really quickly. I've always liked Field of Dreams, but when you have kids, you know how when you have a frontal lobotomy, sometimes your brain just kind of changes?
I have no idea what a frontal lobotomy is like.
I've heard, though, that your brain can kind of change. You just develop a different personality. When you have kids, I think you have a little bit of a different personality as well. There's also a joke out there that I have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy, which is a dumb joke. I probably shouldn't even said that. But the point is, when you have kids, I became about 10 times more sentimental. Field of Dreams is a very sentimental movie, and I like it even more now because of that. Because when you have a kid, you just get very sentimental. I'm just more sentimental and just about life in general. For instance, I like country music now a lot more than I used to because country music's kind of sentimental. And when you have kids, you just develop that sense of sentimentality a little bit more or something. I don't know, but I love Field of Dreams. Somebody's talking about comparing Cager and Pickens. So the thing we've been kind of saying around here is of those four, and I've kind of put them in groups. The two freshmen, Blaylock and Pickens, the two experienced players at other programs, D-Rob and Cager. Of those four, I expect two of them to pop. And I'm not really sure which two it's going to be, but I believe of those four, you can expect two of those guys to join the somewhat known commodities on the Georgia receiving corps as big-time players. And, the odds are anytime you're talking about a category of players, about half of them will show up and show out, and about half of them, for whatever reason, just kind of won't. That's just sort of the history of football talent evaluation. And that's kind of my thing on that. And I honestly don't know of those four which it's going to be, but just given the credentials that all four of them have, I feel pretty confident saying Georgia's going to find itself two good receivers from that quartet. I just do. G. Grace, I'm not even going to read this comment. G, you're better than that. For those of you on Facebook, we have a guy named G. Grace who's a pretty good guy. I mean, G's been here, a part of our programs for a long time, but he's over there still.
I mean, that's just, all respect to G. Grace. That's just a wrong comment. That's just not to say Fromm is quote unquote. He's holding back the team with dink and doink passes.
I just said I wasn't going to read it. Why are you going to?
Because if he's putting it out there, we deserve to let everyone know what he's saying. I fundamentally that's a wrong statement. I mean, you can make the case Tua's holding Alabama back because he constantly can't stay healthy. That's just a wrong statement. Fromm is a big reason why Georgia's 24-5 over these last two seasons. There's a reason why he's been able to go toe-to-toe with Alabama. I actually pulled up the stats today, and if you compare Tua's stats to Jake Fromm's stats in the two times they've played, Fromm has categorically better stats. Now, obviously, he hasn't won those two games, but I don't think you can put any of that at all on Fromm's shoulders.
All right, so let me try to ask a question without stirring up a hornet's nest. If you look at Fromm's statistics, he's not a dink and dunk passer.
No, 9 yards at attempt.
Yeah,
he's not Chad Pennington. All due respect to Chad Pennington.
If you want to go back to his freshman season, according to Pro Football Focus, as a freshman, he was like 40-something% on throws 20 or more yards down the field. Like, that's not dink and dunk stuff. And yet, our buddy G. Grace, the Alabama fan, is not the only one who thinks that. So here's my question. Why do people think Fromm is a dink and dunk thrower? Why do some people think that Fromm is a dink and dunk thrower when the stats suggest otherwise?
Probably because they look at his total yards and he hasn't eclipsed the 3,000 yard mark, and he didn't throw it a lot his freshman year or really his sophomore year at that. So I think people sort of let the stats narrative and the fact that he doesn't throw it a lot sort of shade this whole he's captain check down. When in reality that's just not what he is. Georgia doesn't throw the ball a lot. They've ran the ball more than 60% of their times in each of the 2 years he's been a starter. So. And, they probably also assume that because he doesn't have this cannon of an arm, they attribute that to the fact that, he's, not, quote-unquote, capable of being able to make all those downfield throws, whereas somebody mentioned on the YouTube comment, look at the throw he made to Mecole Hardman in the national championship game. Look at the absolute dime he threw to Riley Ridley in the SEC championship game last year. Those are NFL-level throws. So, to call him a dink and dunk or dink and doink passer is just inaccurate.
Dante Edie on Facebook says, I can remember when BA made the announcement on the podcast that we were going to start live on Facebook. Dante, I'm glad to know you've been with us that long. And yeah, the first video studio we used, you can still find some of these videos. It's a very different looking studio than this. It's kind of amazing to kind of go back and see some of that now, kind of where we were at the beginning of this before DawgNation World Headquarters was truly built the way that it is now. But Dante, I'm really glad to know you've been with us for that long. Hugh Nash says on a different subject, hope David Marshall comes back strong. Would love to see a Marshall Davis Clark front three along the defensive line. I don't know what to make of David Marshall other than to say, in talking to Marshall during spring practice, he didn't sound that optimistic about when he was going to be back playing again. So maybe the summer brings a new tone on that, but I'm not quite sure what to make about the David Marshall situation right now. Coming back from that Liz Frank situation, it's just a tough injury recovery. And by the way, I think I've told this to some of our staff off the air. I don't know if I've ever said this on the air. To show you how dumb I am, I thought Liz Frank was like someone's name, like Lizfrank. I didn't know.
Well, you're not a doctor, so.
But it was like all one word. I thought it was like named, named after Liz Frank. I thought she invented it or something. Sometimes, boy, I tell you what. Sometimes I amaze myself at how smart I can be about some things and not smart about other things. Gerald Harmon says the Fromm thing comes down to his yards per game. That's probably true. That people do look at the yards per game more so than anything else, and I think the counter argument to the question that I just asked about Fromm a moment ago is basically why don't people give him enough credit for being as good as he is? The counterbalance to that discussion is, well, if he's as good as I think he is, how come he didn't play better at LSU? And honestly, I think that's a fair question because
he had a bad game that day. I don't think anyone will deny that.
But I guess my point is, he had a bad game that day for reasons that I can't fully explain. I go back and watch the game again. It's sort of hard to know why Georgia just played so terrible. They just played terrible. And I don't fully understand that. So I'm going to defend Fromm, 8 days a week, twice on Sunday. But even when you look at that LSU game, I have to say, boy, I'm not quite sure what happened there. That was not a good day. Not a good day. So it's a fair rebuttal to all of this.
I think from watching him that day, I think it was clear he was trying very hard to not make a mistake. And in doing so, that made him just a little less accurate because he was maybe overthinking some throws. And I'll also add that the Georgia wide receivers that day, other than really Riley Ridley, had a very difficult time sort of separating or getting free from LSU's coverage, and I think that made Fromm's job a little bit harder. So when you combine wide receivers not getting open with a quarterback who's trying not to make a mistake and sort of playing the game, you do get the sort of 16 for 36 with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions.
And I believe that Bruce Feldman from The Athletic wrote about this game that LSU took its nose guard and kind of moved it from a 1 technique to a 0 technique, basically like put it right in front of Lamont Gilliard, and Georgia couldn't run the ball again after that at all. And I haven't watched the game closely enough to say that happened or didn't happen, but that's also what some of the chatter was, is that Dave Aranda made that adjustment,
simply
putting a nose guard right in front of Gilliard, and it just changed the entire way in which Georgia approached the run game there that day, and essentially could not get its run game going after that. So, Kathy Aquavia Green on the subject of wide receivers, this is on Facebook. She says, there is something beautiful about having freshmen. A confident freshman with talent can make plays, period. The road to the last 2 national championships was paved with true freshmen. I think Kathy's right about that. And I think we're in a day and age now where, wide receiver used to be a position that was really difficult for freshmen to play. Now I think it's a position that's become kind of difficult. I don't think it's as tough for freshmen as it used to be because I think the position is becoming a little bit more about just kind of going out there and making plays, especially for a lot of these spread teams where, the receivers have a lot of freedom in terms of the kinds of routes they want to run. At Georgia, it's probably a little bit different than that. But, just go out there and just make something happen. And I'll take an 18-year-old kid doing that as much as anybody. I don't think you got to be 21 years old to go out there and do that in this day and age in college football. So I think Kathy's right about that. On YouTube, Stacy Copel on the subject. That's funny. That is really funny. Alex Howard says, I do find it sad that Bama and Clemson are playing nobodies the week that Georgia plays Notre Dame. So sad maybe in one respect because, let's face it, around here we like banging on both those team schedules, but also an opportunity for Georgia. If I've been kind of beating the drum of I'd like to see Georgia be undefeated in the regular season, make a strong argument for being the number 1 overall seed in the playoff, even though there's a gap between the 2 playoff games, I think that still matters. I think it would be a good thing for Georgia to do. And even though we don't have playoff rankings that early in the season, I do think it would be very interesting to see what the response would be if Clemson's playing Spartanburg Central High School and Georgia's playing Notre Dame. If Georgia wins that game in emphatic fashion, let's put the AP and coaches poll voters into a decision. Let's make them put their chips on the table about what they think about a Georgia team ranked 3rd going out there and beating a Notre Dame team that may be ranked 5th. And I have a lot of confidence that Georgia's just going to pound Notre Dame. A lot of confidence.
Just sort of, I know people have made guffaws at Clemson and Alabama's schedule. Clemson will have played Texas A&M by that point.
Is that right?
Yeah, they will have played because the Notre Dame game is a Week 4 game. There are a lot of teams that are starting, basically the bulk run of their conference play that week, and so in that game, Georgia's stepping out of conference in part because they play Vanderbilt in Week 1.
I want to get Will Marlowe's comment in a moment. Let me follow up on this though. So let's say that Clemson at home. Now this may not happen, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's say it does. Let's say that Clemson gets by Texas A&M, but it's a close game. Those 2 teams in College Station played a close game last year. So let's say they play a close game again this year, and let's say that Georgia Notre Dame is not close. I don't feel like you'll get coaches poll voters doing a whole lot of movement. I think you'll get some AP movement.
Yep.
I think you do. Alabama will have played Duke. I'm not really quite sure who they play Week 2, Week 3. It's got to be at least one SEC team, right?
Yeah, no, they play Duke Week 1.
No, I'm saying, but if Alabama's playing a cupcake Week 4 and Duke Week 1, they've got to play at least one SEC team in either
I believe
Week 2
it's Ole Miss, so a cupcake team. But
so you think that Georgia becomes the consensus number 2 if it beats Notre Dame, given what Alabama's done for the first 4 weeks?
So Alabama plays South Carolina in Week 3. At home, that's a home game for them. They play Southern Miss in Week 4. Sort of wrap things up. I actually think if they hammer Notre Dame, because Notre Dame's going to be probably a top 5 team when those 2 teams meet, I think there's a chance Georgia catapults to number 1.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder if you can get enough movement off of Clemson. I think that you should get movement ahead of Alabama. But if it's a close win for Clemson earlier against Texas A&M, and if it's an emphatic win for Georgia against Notre Dame, just given all the chatter that's out there right now about how high profile that TV situation might be, I think Georgia would really benefit from that. Will Marlowe in our YouTube comment section talks about the Diamond Dogs Day against Arkansas. I'm curious to see Wilcox, the freshman, in an environment like this against a really good Arkansas team, just because of he's the guy I think that you want to get some experience in games like this. Now, neither Georgia or Arkansas needs this game for anything, but you're in a professional ballpark. You got TV coverage. it's probably up to this point from a ceremonial standpoint the biggest game that Wilcox has pitched up at this moment. I don't think it's a bad thing to give him some experience. I don't. And Georgia got the timely hit yesterday with Shepard against the Aggies. I think it would be really fun to see them produce a more sustained level of offense today against Arkansas. I'd be curious of that. This is not an elimination game for Georgia. This is still a double elimination situation right now. So it's not a must-win game for either team, even beyond the fact that both teams can already have their postseason sewn up. So I think I view this game as a little bit of a dress rehearsal for Wilcox because, Wilcox is almost certainly going to be starting a big game for Georgia beyond this. And I think seeing how he does here, big hard-throwing guy. Georgia's got a lot of hard flame-throwing pitchers. I think seeing how he does here is going to be pretty interesting.
I think this game determines how the rest of the week goes for Georgia. If they win this game, they only have to play 2 more games after this. Georgia hasn't won an SEC baseball championship since 1954.
How about that? Hadn't won a game in the tournament since 2011.
Since 2011. I was a junior in high school when it last happened. So I think if they can get a win today against a good Arkansas team that's going to be a top 8 seed, I think this might be a time where they say, hey, let's go for it. We've got Hancock and Losey probably starting those 2 weekend games. Hopefully they can get 6, 7, 8 innings out of it, keep sort of the bullpen at rest, because I think the bullpen is going to be a lot more important for the regional and just having as many fresh arms as you can. So I think if they win today, I think that is, really going to set up how things go.
But go back to what you said a moment ago. There's no downside to trying to win, right? You don't need to win, but it's not like you're going to exhaust your pitching staff, right? If anything...
that's the theoretical one risk, is that you throw so many guys out there and they're throwing hard because they are trying to win, that maybe potentially you have some guys who aren't fully ready to go.
But honestly, I'm asking, I'm not telling. This is a question. Right. I'm curious. It's bad to go too long without pitching anyway, though, right?
Repeat that again.
It's bad to go too long without pitching anyway, right?
To an extent, yes. So
because if I thought there was any... I guess the truth is I just don't know. But
if
I thought
it's one of these fun, because I batted around with a guy who's pretty close to the Georgia baseball team yesterday, and it's sort of. So what do you think Georgia should do? Should they really try and go all out? Because Georgia's strength is its pitching staff, and he sort of parlayed the point. They win tomorrow, they're going to go for it. If they lose, they might say, all right, well, we'll see what happens.
Al Chandler says, who's the home team? Arkansas is the 2 seed, I believe, so I'm assuming that
even though Georgia had a better SEC record than Arkansas.
How does that work?
Arkansas won the SEC West, and thus they get one of the top 2 seeds.
So I'm assuming that makes them the home team, given the fact that they're the 2 seed. Georgia's the 3 seed there. Somebody had some funny comments today.
So there have been a couple of people asking about one of our summer Q&A questions, specifically one name in particular on YouTube that they've been dying to bring up. So we'll throw it back up there. I'm going to set the first question: which UGA unit/player could be considered the nation's best? We've talked about Rodrigo Blankenship. We have talked about Andrew Thomas. We have talked about the offensive line. However, there's one name on YouTube that has come up quite a bit, and that is Eric Stokes.
Ooh, that's interesting.
I see the vision. I respect the takes. I think it's a little early for Stokes, just because given he has really only started about 4 or 5 games, even though he's played fairly significantly. But it would not shock me in the slightest if come that theoretical Alabama game in the SEC championship, we're looking at it like, Stokes' guy can go head to head with Jerry Jeudy, who, and Mel Kiper thinks Jerry Jeudy is the best NFL draft prospect in the country. So right now, it's probably a little too soon to say Stokes could be the best in the nation, but it would not surprise me in the slightest if he is in that conversation come December.
So here is who Athlon, we talked to Mitch Light earlier, here's who they have as their first-team All-America cornerbacks. Paulson Adebo from Stanford, Bryce Hall from Virginia. I'll take Stokes over both those guys. I'm kidding. I don't know the first thing about either one. Here's who they have second-team cornerback. Christian Fulton from LSU. He's obviously good. Lavert Hill from Michigan.
He's obviously good. You just because he was a big-name recruit. The Virginia guys, the Virginia corner you just named he's a guy who's been mentioned as a first-round draft pick. So
yeah, I don't really know the first name of either one of them. The third-team All-America cornerbacks for Athlon. They got Trajan Bandy from Miami, and then C.J. Henderson from Florida, who is a good player. I mean, I hate to admit that, but he is a good player. But I do think Stokes qualifies as an example of I don't believe anybody in the country has any idea how good he really is. I just don't think that he's famous in that regard yet. Now, being the best corner in the country, which is a very interesting take to make, being the best cornerback in the country, it may be hard to get to that level by the time it's all said and done. But if you want to talk about a guy that is way better than people think, because Georgia does not show up in really any of these preseason top 10s for secondary. Georgia does not have one of the 10 best secondaries in the country, I think, from really virtually anybody's perspective. And I don't believe that's true. So I don't know that Stokes is the best corner in the country, but I think Stokes' just assuredness at that cornerback position, there is no doubt in my mind that Georgia's got one of the 10 best secondaries in the country. There's just no doubt in my mind.
I think if we ask Kirby Smart, I think Kirby's like one of my big takeaways from the spring was Kirby Smart feels very, very confident about what he has in this secondary group. Just about every guy he's played significant, the theoretical 4 starters, Stokes, Campbell, J.R. Reed at safety, and for right now, Richard LeCount at the other safety. All of those guys have played significant reps in big-time football games. So you have to think that, they've got the experience. They've got talent behind them. Otis Reese, Tyreek Stevenson, Lewis Seen, who looked awesome at G-Day. I think there's a chance that by the end of the year, you could say this Georgia secondary is just the best in the country, just in terms of the talent that they have, the depth that they have, and sort of what they'll be able to do, especially now that they have, you would think they have just more capable pass rushers and guys like Nolan Smith, Azeez Ojulari, Jermaine Johnson. I could continue to list outside linebackers all day.
Dante Edie says don't sleep on Mark Webb either. Philip Jordan Wells says there's a UGA girl on The Price is Right now. That's kind of nice to think about. Have you watched any of this Jeopardy James stuff?
I've watched some of it.
I always forget that it's on. I don't. I guess
you got to make an appointment viewing.
Yeah, I never can remember to watch it when it's on, but I would like to see it because I'm actually kind of fascinated by that.
It's kind of like the Connecticut women's basketball thing. Are they bad for the game of Jeopardy? It's starting to get to so that some people are worried he's going to pass Ken Jennings. Ken Jennings is not the best Jeopardy player of all time. That goes to Brad Reuter. He has never lost. And he's actually made the most money on Jeopardy despite just playing a smaller sample size. But, it is interesting, but at some point I want to see him lose. And the thing is, he's just like, it's not even like close Jeopardy games. Yeah. He is destroying people.
Yeah, it's really pretty amazing. By the way, we mentioned the Miami players. Now Dennis Wilson becomes another country heard from on YouTube. It's really kind of amazing.
You want to go to the second summer Q&A question?
Yeah, please. We'll do that when we get out of here. So how will James Coley change the UGA offense? My suggestion is he will change it just slightly. I do think because of Fromm's experience, they'll throw it a little bit more. I don't believe they're going to throw it as much as the anonymous coaches, nor maybe some of the Georgia players think. I think that's wishful thinking. I'm going to trust Kirby Smart and take him at his word when he says, essentially, we're going to just keep doing what we have been doing. I don't think Kirby's got any reason to lie about that. For the most part, that's what I believe Georgia's going to do.
I was, again, looking at the percentages last night in terms of run-pass. I think it'll probably be closer to around 43, 44%, which is an uptick from where it was last year at 39%. But I don't think you're suddenly going to see Georgia come out throwing the ball 55% of the time. I think given how good the offensive line is, how good the running backs are, Georgia's calling card on offense is still going to be its running game, which, again, could, I think, potentially be the best in the country.
On YouTube, Jacob Thompson says Ken Jennings got on an All-Star Jeopardy show and got owned.
Yeah, by Brad Reuter.
So,
Watson the computer.
I'm going to give you way hotter of a Jeopardy take than anyone asked for. Mm-hmm. I feel like when I think about Ken Jennings and compared to Jeopardy James, I feel like it's sort of like thinking about how like Bob Cousy would have fit into like the modern basketball game.
Come on.
Because, I mean, the one thing that James does is he bets way higher amounts.
Yeah.
He chases the daily doubles. He's playing just an overall strategy. Like Ken Jennings is really smart, obviously, to answer all those questions. You got to be smart. But in terms of the style of play, Ken Jennings did not play the modern style the way that Jeopardy James does. And that's the most impressive thing about him is the fact that he's calculating these daily double totals in his head. He's essentially, like one time, he's from Vegas. Like he kind of figured out the final Jeopardy thing, and like his winning score was like the Las Vegas zip code. I'm sorry, like Ken Jennings was winning games. James is winning in style.
To go inside Jeopardy, if you want to start hunting that daily double, and then if you get it in that first Jeopardy game, always go true daily double, because the likelihood is you're going to be able to make it up in the second round.
Right.
And if you get that question right, you have such a significant advantage. You can really control the tempo and pace of the game.
I swear this is my last Jeopardy point. I promise. But the other thing that Jeopardy James really smart about is as much as you can control this, he tries not to get the first daily double too soon, because if you get the daily double too soon, you don't have anything to double.
You want to build up to your around $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and then daily double that, and you're at $10,000 while your competitors are roughly around 2, and they're trying to play catch up.
Marcus Bass says Ken Jennings is the all-time great on Jeopardy. You got to give credit where credit's due.
Oh no, he's not.
So I feel like, and I don't even know who this guy you're talking about is, but I feel like between the two guys I've heard of, the guy that's doing it now and Ken Jennings, who I had heard of, I feel like you got to do like a Seabiscuit style match race, right? 2 podiums, Alex Trebek, and just one-on-one, and do it on primetime. I feel like I feel like that would get ratings. I'm actually surprised they haven't already announced that they're going to do this.
Yeah, if we got Jeopardy James, Ken Jennings, and Brad Reuter.
But nobody knows who Brad Reuter is. He's only famous
to you.
Jeopardy fans. He's only famous to you. I'm talking about prime time. You know, like you had like what Jefferson's and Good Times, whatever, last night.
Yeah.
I'm talking about you got to do prime time. I feel like there's only 2 Jeopardy guys famous enough for prime time. On the subject of how the Coley offense could be different, he says more screens, running backs catching more out of the backfield, and bring back the UGA sweep. I tell you, we had Troy Sadowski in our comment section yesterday, the former All-American tight end. Y'all know I like Troy, and that's one of the things that Troy's big on, because he was a great blocker on those toss sweep plays. He wants to see Georgia running those again, and I wouldn't mind seeing that either. Josh Bonin says, BA, I was thinking about Sunshine the Snake from the other day, and I have to give credit to someone else who posted about it earlier last week. Maybe Sunshine is a jab at Florida. After all, Burmese pythons are an invasive species to Florida and are competing for food from the alligator indigenous to the region. Kind of like what Kirby is doing, poaching Florida recruits out of the states. That's maybe my favorite comment of all time. I find that to be exceptional, to think that Brian Gant's snake is a subtle jab at Florida because it's invaded the Florida ecosystem and it's now sucking all the life away from the alligators. I like that. And Winston Mock does back up Connor and saying that everybody knows who. What's his name again?
Brad Reuter.
Yeah,
19-0 all time in Jeopardy games.
Winston Mock says everyone knows who that is. BA. All right, so I'll take Winston's word on that.
Ken Jennings is like Hank Aaron and Jerry Rice. He's just a compiler.
Please don't do this. Please don't do this. I can assure you.
Hey, some people will take that as a compliment.
All right. What's our last question again? I already forgot.
What does UGA need most to overtake Alabama and Clemson?
So I'm going to change this based on the conversation from earlier. And I hate to even do this, and we're going to do this quick. We're going to get off the air. Mm-hmm. Did Georgia choke against Alabama? Am I just not wanting to see what everybody else sees? Because I honestly don't believe that those 2 games should be called chokes.
The first game's not a choke. The national championship game I would not say is a choke job. The second game, it's not a total choke because it wasn't like a 3-touchdown lead, but Georgia had Alabama in multiple 3rd and 10s when it was up against. I know Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback, but they had Alabama in multiple 3rd and longs when they were winning that game, and they could not get Alabama off the field. Yeah. And that does. And then when you combine that with the fake punt decision, that does have the recipes of choking. I don't know if it's a full-blown choke job, but, the guy's coughing a lot and there's food stuck in his throat, and a couple of observers at the restaurant are starting to get nervous.
So I got a lot of good comments coming in. I'm going to read a lot of these. Let me just say a couple things. The fake punt was an unimaginably bad coaching decision. Mm-hmm. But it's unfair to say that cost Georgia the game because it was 4th and 11 from midfield. I had a very respected person tell me that he thought Kirby Smart didn't think he was going to get the football back. So, Georgia may have been on its way to losing because 4th and 11 at midfield, Alabama driving for a chance against what looked to be a tired Georgia defense, driving for a chance to win. So, I do think it's probably an incorrect assessment of history to say the fake punt cost Georgia the game because the fake punt in some respects was Georgia's last flailing attempt to try to win a game. They were on their way towards, losing by the time that happened there as well. But, man, there is a lot of comments coming in. Let me get a few of these.
There are a lot of the saying Georgia choked.
Yeah, Dante.
If you want to say that, I don't think you're totally wrong in saying so.
Yeah, Dante E. says, I hate to say it, but we choked. Pine Sol Lemon says we choked, but not like the Falcons at least. Yeah, it wasn't as bad as 28-3. Will Marlowe says even Hot Rod missed a dang field goal. And if you want to make the case that was kind of a choke job, Hot Rod, who's been as sure a thing as you could be, and I think will still be a sure thing for Georgia this year, he did miss that field goal. And it becomes very hard if Georgia's up 17 points. Georgia's chance of winning that game have to be much, much higher. Much higher. Paul K says, you can golf or play any sport out of this world, but unless you finish the game, you don't win. Finishers win. UG has to finish, and I can't wait when they do. I agree with a lot of what Paul says there, especially when it comes to choking in golf, because gosh knows I've choked enough rounds of golf away.
People are bringing up the second and 26. That's to call that a choke is, ridiculous. There are plenty of times over the course of a football game where teams get, backed up and end up winning the game.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia had a vulnerable secondary in 2017.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky enough for the Rose Bowl to watch the overtime from the field. You talk about an experience that I'll never forget. I mean, I'm talking about I stood right in front of the action as close to me as I am to you through this camera right now. And it's amazing to watch that Georgia defense from that year on a short field when all of a sudden – you couldn't, Baker Mayfield couldn't overthrow the defensive secondary. You couldn't stretch the field. There's no field to stretch. You had the inline essentially working as a 12th defender. Remember, it was a penalty, but DeAndre Baker got an interception in that overtime sequence. The Georgia secondary was helped by short fields in overtime, and all of a sudden you have guys like Roquan Smith and Lorenzo Carter in that group. They are on the run. Georgia was such a dynamic defense on the short field. Unfortunately, and I'm not making excuses, but this happened. Unfortunately, on that first down play, Georgia got a sack. All of a sudden, it wasn't quite such a short field anymore. And it
opened up a lot more stuff that Alabama could try and run.
And I think it made the Georgia secondary, which had been a little vulnerable all year, it made it vulnerable once again. And you can go back and you can play the blame game of who got moved out of position and who got beat. And I hate all that kind of stuff. But like I said, I've not really felt like they were choke jobs, but it's very it's very interesting to hear as many Georgia fans say, yeah, they thought it was. For sure.
Two quick things. One, G. Grace has somehow topped his comment earlier and made an even worse one, saying Nolan Smith won't play this year.
Oh, come on, G.
That's just moronic.
What are you, Skip Bayless now?
Yeah. Skip Bayless wouldn't even make that take.
You've been commenting on these shows for years. You're better than that.
Something had to get in G. Grace's coffee today because it's usually not this bad. As far as what UGA needs to take Alabama and I guess Clemson if they see each other, it's really simple, but it's just luck. They need some bounces to go their way. They need the Tyler Simmons onside thing to go their way.
Yeah. Al Chandler brings up some of the officiating stuff.
Yeah, you just need DeAndre Walker not getting hurt, Monty Rice not injuring his foot in a freak accident against UMass. You just need some of those small little breaks that happen over the course of the game or course of the season, sort of swing in their favor.
And I guess that's my final point on this, and we'll wrap up the show after this. That's one of the reasons why I'm inclined to believe that the issue is not so much the intangible stuff of, hey, you just got to finish the job at the end of the game. To me, it is more of a tangible thing. You saw an individual player show out until he left the game with injury in DeAndre Walker. And in some cases, Georgia's inability to get it done against Alabama has been, to me, about not having enough individual stars doing the thing that they're famous for. So this year, my hope is that you add more guys to this defense who have a chance of being like legitimate playmakers. I know that word gets used too much in football to the point where it almost loses its meaning. But at the same time, we know what playmakers are, and I do think this Georgia defense has a chance to have more of those this year. That means that a guy like Jordan Davis, who did not play in the SEC championship, right? No, I'm sorry, he played in the SEC championship, but he didn't play in the Sugar Bowl. Yeah, pardon me. That means that guy's got to occupy those multiple blockers there in the middle of that defense. It means that Nolan Smith or Jermaine Johnson, they got to blow past an offensive tackle. By the way, Alabama's going to be working in some at least a new guy over there, and that's a spot this year. You've got to have individual guys step up and make some plays right there. And I think as one of the commenters mentioned, even though these two losses were painful, still very confident that it can still happen and get it done for Georgia. So I think these are really fun conversations, really great to be part of. Thank you all for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Connor, you got a final thought before we wrap up today?
Don't underestimate Brad Reuter of Jeopardy. Our one true champion. Actually, Should I save my Game of Thrones take for tomorrow? Make that a Friday subject?
Yeah, let's please.
I actually have a comparison for Game of Thrones and how it relates to Georgia football.
All right, well, I look forward to that. That'll be fun. That's Connor Riley. I'm Brandon Adams. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. You can get it all you need there at rsandrews.com. We will have DawgNation Daily tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Last show for us, obviously for the week, it's Friday, but then no show on Monday because of the observance of the Memorial Day holiday. So we shall be back with you again after tomorrow. We'll be back in on Tuesday. You followed all that? I feel like I didn't explain that as clearly and as easily as it could have been. But nonetheless, I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. You'll have a great day.